All right, so we are looking at the training adaptations today for our different energy systems. We're going to talk about how we're going to train for different adaptations depending on whether or not we're focusing more on like a glycolysis energy production, or if we're focusing on like an aerobic metabolism energy production. We actually aren't getting too much into ATP-PC today. That's going to come up a little bit more tomorrow, I think. But learning objectives today, we want to understand the principles of exercise training and how the body is going to adapt to exercise. We'll also talk a little bit about like various different principles, whether that's like overload to make the body better, or reversibility, which would actually make the body a little bit worse, like if you don't exercise. Individual differences and things like that. We'll talk a little bit about like what adaptations take place when you do primarily train for aerobic systems versus like anaerobic systems, like how that body, like how your body actually specifically grows in those different ways. The role of fast twitch fibers and the role of slow twitch fibers. We'll talk about how like you also have a little bit of like peripheral adaptations, like rather than just looking at like how your cells are producing energy, there's other stuff that your body does as well. You know, it makes more enzymes, and it can just have more proteins to contract better. So like that's going to create like a big difference there. And so we'll talk about like how we can use interval training and cardiovascular adaptations to actually help us with our strength adaptations. Just doesn't seem like those things are directly related, but again, you got to think of it as like, if you can build yourself a better engine, you'll be able to work harder with that engine. You know what I mean? So even a little bit of cardio can help my bodybuilders out there, you know, which bodybuilders and cardio are usually like this. So we'll also talk a little bit about genetics, just because that is going to be relevant. And like how that can affect our athletics as well. So here's what's kind of fun though. Despite everything that we're talking about today, all those different like learning objectives, we've got all of these different things we're looking at. The big thing that we're kind of focused on today are these general principles of adaptation. Like that's really what we're looking at, is like how our body adapts and why we want to do things that are going to trigger that adaptation, right? We want to focus on doing as many things as possible that trigger adaptation, right? Rather than finding sort of the quick, easiest path for things, right? Or like this helps us understand like why you'll hear people get so dogmatic about exercise sometimes. They're like, no, you got to do this many reps, you got to do this many sets, and they'll get like very specific about it. And we're going to sort of understand like why that is like either true or untrue, you know. In today's lesson, we're going to kind of look at some of these principles of adaptation, which is huge. So probably the biggest one, if you guys forget everything I tell you today, the big one that I want you to remember is like the principle of overload, right? So the big thing that we want to keep in mind is that in order to like get the body to adapt to whatever, you know, whatever it is we are aiming for, we need to have overload. Okay. If your body has, the easiest way to think about it is like, if your body has no reason to grow, it won't. Right? Like if it has no reason to get better, then it won't get better, you know? That's the principle of overload in a nutshell. I used to, when I taught group exercise classes, I would always say like, guys, last round here, what I really want you to do is I want you to make your body go, oh no, I sucked at this. That's like, that was like what I used to always say. I was like, I want your body to say, oh no, I'm bad at this. And that way your body will have a reason to get better. It'll have a reason to get stronger, and it'll, you know, adapt. So when we're looking at like combating like all of these various different things, you know, regular exercise not only combats obesity, because obviously like just it burns a lot of calories, but it also combats diabetes, right? Like if you exercise regularly, you are using glycolysis to produce energy at certain points of that workout. And the more you use glycolysis, the more you are telling your body, hey, this sugar that we store in our body is used and like needed for energy. So then it keeps your body sensitive to insulin, rather than when you just bring in carbohydrates as like a regular part of your diet and you don't exercise, your glycogen stores are just full and your body's never able to like, put new glycogen in the blood, or well, not in the blood, in the muscles or in the liver and stuff. If it doesn't have any space for it, then your body's like, well, all right, well, we're just going to leave this sugar out of here because I don't have anything to do with it, right? And obviously we don't need it to produce energy. So then it just like stays passively, and that's what messes up your metabolism. So exercise, drains out that sugar, and that's why it increases your sensitivity. Exercise has a positive impact on blood pressure. We know that like you only have so much blood in your body. Remember, it's a closed circuit, right? So if your body needs to like have blood in one area, what it will do is it will dilate the blood vessels to that area. And then like blood's going to go in that direction. And what it'll do is it'll constrict the blood vessels in other areas. And so by dilating one area and constricting another, that naturally moves blood because again, we kind of talked about this when we were talking about the heart, but like fluid will always go to an area of low pressure. And if there's a dilated blood vessel, that's where the pressure is the lowest. So that's what happens in order to like move blood to our legs when we start like walking up a hill. And then like all of a sudden, if we stopped walking up that hill and we started doing push-ups, all the blood would go to our chest, right? And if we started doing some pull-ups, then our blood would go to our back. Because obviously like those tissues need to be able to produce energy. So your body is opening up the blood vessels to those tissues so that it can get as much blood there and get as much oxygen and be able to bin sugar and, produce as much energy as possible. So blood pressure naturally gets better through exercise as sort of a byproduct of that exercise. And then even cholesterol, right? Cholesterol, passive just cholesterol, like fat running through your blood, right? Is going to get broken down and converted into different hormones. Like cholesterols get converted into testosterone and other things like that. And so like, the more you exercise, the more your body will actually create those positive hormones, and it uses testosterone as a fuel to do that, which cleans out your blood. So that's why we want to develop a healthy lifestyle. And that's why it's so important for us to push our clients, because we do need to get to that level of exercise. You know what I mean? Like I always like, I used to say this all the time, and I kind of got out of it a little bit because it sounded a little bit too judgmental. And I think that sometimes like they've rubbed my clients the wrong way. But I used to say this a lot. I used to say like, there is a huge difference between going to the gym and exercising. Like, gyms sell more memberships than they can actually handle because they know people are not going to use them. Or like, they also, that's one of the reasons why gyms will have just like a giant row of treadmills and then like a little bitty weightlifting area. I mean, gyms have gotten better for sure. But like the reason there's so much cardio equipment compared to other stuff is because like that is the stuff that like a lot of people will just kind of show up, they'll get on there and they'll just kind of go at a pace where they can read a magazine, or they're going to watch, TV and chime into the Bluetooth, rather than training for something specifically. So what we know is that doesn't result in adaptation, right? Your body has no reason, you're not going to get a suntan from hanging out indoors all day, right? Your body doesn't get exposed to UV light, so then it has no reason to like, create more melanin. So the same thing is true when it comes to exercise, right? We need to push our bodies to a certain amount of stress in order for our bodies to adapt. So if you forget everything I tell you, this is the big thing: the principle of overload, right? The principle of overload is a principle that states that greater than normal stress is required for training adaptations to take place. So what that says is that you have to push your body out of its comfort zone. You have to get to an area where your body is uncomfortable doing something in order for your body to actually adapt. You want bigger muscles, you're going to have to train for bigger muscles. You want better cardio, you're going to have to train for better cardio. And the way you train for those things is pushing yourself and progressing slowly over time. That's why I talk to people all the time, and they're like, I bench all the time, and like, my numbers aren't going up anymore. I'm not getting any stronger in my chest at this point. And I was like, well, you need to work at an intensity that's new to your body. Your body's really good at benching. So maybe step away from it for a little while and do something else, and then and that'll help with it. And then we'll come back to it later and see if we get a major adaptation. That's more of like that's understanding the principle of variability, because variety is also helpful for growth. But the reason variety is helpful for growth is because your body thinks it's being overloaded again because it forgot. That's why it feels so terrible to work out after you take like 2 weeks off. You're like, oh, it's always worse when you come out, or like when you switch up and get on a new routine. New routine soreness slaps differently than, a regular soreness after a workout. So we're going to see some different adaptations here, right? The idea here is that we want to have consistent increases to a stimulus in order to experience adaptation, right? So when we talk about this, a lot of times you'll hear people say, progressive overload, right? That's the big term that you often hear, progressive overload. Like here we can see like this is the principle of overload, right? That's what NASM's calling it. But a lot of times you'll just hear bodybuilders, powerlifters, people like that. They're just going to mention a lot about progressive overload. So if I just look up progressive overload, we are going to see a ton of examples of stuff like this, right? Here's kind of the classic example, right? And I like this one because like it's easy to kind of see it with the numbers and the math and stuff, right? Week 1, you lift for 10 reps. I mean, you're doing 3 sets here. So 1 set, 2 set, 3 set, 1 set, 2, yeah, right? 3 sets in all 3 versions of this. 3 sets of 10 at 80 kilograms, right? So that means you're lifting 800 kilograms per set. You did 10 reps each time. Right over here, we got an extra rep in on week 2, which is great, right? And so now 880 kilograms was lifted here, and then we're back to like 10 and 10, right? And over here, we got 11 in both sets. This is one of the reasons why I like to give my clients a rep range when I'm telling them to lift. I'm like, look, I want you to be somewhere between 10 and 12 reps. If you can do 13, it's too light. If you can't do 10, it's too heavy, right? So we're trying to like dial in those numbers because I want them to push. But you can see, look at the total amount of weight lifted. 2,400 kilograms here, 2,480 here, 2,560. Now, sometimes progressive overload doesn't just have to be like increasing your reps every week. Sometimes it can also be increasing the load. Actually, this is the one that I always like to show people. So look at this version here, right? Workout 1, they do all 3 sets of 10 repetitions at 185 pounds, right? So that's 3 times 10 times 185. So that's 5,550 pounds for their first workout. And then next week, they come back and they throw 190 pounds on the bar. Let's say they were able to keep it up for all 3 sets. So 190 times 10 times 3 sets. So 5,700, right? So we got a big increase there. And then eventually 195 times 10 times 3 sets, right? 5,850. So they are adding 150 pounds of weight every workout, right? Their overall training volume, their overall like training load has gone up. So that was like one version, right? We could always just make it heavier, right? We could also add reps. That's another really good way to do it. Another way to do it, and actually that's the rep version right there. Another way to progressively overload, you can do more sets. This is a really good one for bodybuilders, actually. You go from doing 3 sets to 4 sets to 5 sets. That adds a massive amount of volume, by the way. This works pretty well at relatively medium to low intensities. Doesn't work super well at like massively high intensities because like you get into like doing too many sets and then you're going to start running into problems. But like imagine, let's say we lift 185 pounds for 3 sets of 10, right? 185 times 10 reps times 3 sets, and then 185 times 10 times 4 sets. That is a huge increase in volume. So sets is probably the biggest way to add a ton of volume. Look at the giant jump that we had there, right? That's one way to do it. Or, and those are probably the 3 most common ones, but you could limit the rest period. You could do the exact same workout and go from resting 2 minutes to 90 seconds to 60 seconds, All of those are going to be adaptations, right? All of those are going to be overloads, right? And those overloads are going to result in different adaptations. Adding sets, adding training volume, that's just going to create a lot more inflammation in the muscles. Adding sets is probably one of the best ways to experience hypertrophy, like muscle size growth, because your body is just going to experience like so much like breakdown, like all your proteins are just all beat up. So your body goes, oh my God, we need more protein, like, and so it just makes more, actin and myosin proteins, and the muscle cells get a little bit larger. If you want to add load, that's one of the best ways to increase and get more neurons, and then those neurons are going to control more muscle fibers. You'll also get more proteins within the muscles, you'll get more myofibrils. If you limit the rest, that's going to tell your body to get better at energy production. So it'll make more mitochondria, or it might make more enzymes to make you even better at glycolysis, if you're still in the glycolysis section of intensity or duration there. So here's a couple of our different adaptations, right? Hypertrophy, your body experiences growth in response to tissue overload, right? There is also atrophy, which is your body will experience tissue breakdown. Now if you do continue to try to overload too often, or at least let's say you try to overload too much, right? What happens if you're trying to push yourself too hard and you can't really, let's say you're tapping out, right? Like for instance, if I went from 190 for 10 reps to 195, but I can only get let's say I get 195 times 10 reps my first set, and then 195, and then I'm just completely tapped out. It was the weight so heavy that I can only do, let's say, 7 reps on the next one, right? And then probably another 7 actually. Probably wouldn't go down below that, but we go 195 times 7 again. So now let's put these 3 together, right? Versus if I had just, lowered the weight, right, back down to 185, I actually would end up doing more training volume on my gentler workout. And that's what happens when you lose intensity. I mean, I lost 6 reps overall, which was a substantial amount. And that's some of the math that you sometimes have to run. If you ever have a client who really gets stuck, or if you're looking at your own lifting and you're just man, my numbers aren't moving the way they're supposed to, and I'm giving it my all every time I'm in the gym. I'm working really hard. You are working really hard. Actually, you're putting all the effort in, but you are not working at the right intensity. Unfortunately, you're working so hard that you're not really recovering between sets, or something is keeping you from being able to push yourself to overload because something else is sort of holding you back, right? Again, bodybuilders who get a little bit of cardio adaptations can actually push themselves harder in their workouts and then experience more muscle growth over time, compared to somebody who only focuses on muscle growth and never does any cardio and doesn't have enough energy to get through a workout, right? So atrophy will happen if your tissue breakdown exceeds your tissue buildup. If you continually break yourself down, you don't get enough sleep, you don't get enough food, you don't get enough recovery time between your workouts, you're not going to experience muscle growth. In fact, you'll experience muscle breakdown, because muscle is not built while you're in the gym, right? Muscle's broken while you're in the gym. Muscle is built in bed and in the kitchen, right? Muscle is built in response to what you did in the gym. So if you are just constantly only spending time in the gym, your body has no time to build itself back up. You'll get nervous system changes. Again, you'll get more motor units. Again, your brain, we look at a motor unit, right? We know that that's a neuron, and then all of the fibers that neuron sort of interacts with, right? So we see here's the neuron, and it's going to run down an electric signal. It's going to zap these 1, 2, 3, 4 muscle fibers. Well, if you make more muscle fibers, but still have the same number of motor units, those muscle fibers aren't really going to get controlled very easily. And so you're not really you may increase in size without increasing in strength. But if you increase the number of motor units you have, and your nervous system can control your muscles and get them to fire faster and, more explosively, right? That's going to give you much more increased strength. So a motor unit, by definition, it's a single neuron in all the fibers it innervates. You will make larger motor units in response to heavy lifting, right? Or you might increase like the stabilization. You could also not lift heavy and still create more motor units, weirdly enough. It doesn't always take heavy lifting to get more motor units. Sometimes you do something in an unstable environment, and your body will make more motor units so that it can control and everything and be like, God, I'm just trying to stay put. It's just trying to learn how to stabilize and balance, right? So that's a big one, right? And then in addition to all of this, like we've been talking about, right, there are all of our cardiovascular adaptations, right? Your body can make more mitochondria, more hemoglobin in your blood, which isn't even like in your muscles directly, but it's a response to exercise. It can make more myoglobin within the muscles, to interact with the hemoglobin. So all of those are like big adaptations to exercise, right? Those are all like things that are going to cause us to experience growth and experience like adaptation. So it requires overload. You're never going to get any of these without, pushing your body as hard as you can. Now, here's the thing. I said, if you remember one thing today, remember the principle of overload. My favorite principle, though, if you want to remember two things, if you choose to cram two things in there today, the other thing that I think that is probably most important, at least this is my favorite thing to understand, is the principle of specificity. And Danny and Eric, we just got done talking about this before, Silas and Al, before you guys joined us. We just had a big day on understanding the principle of specificity just before you guys came in. So this will sound a little bit like review for you guys, but, always good to remember, because I would say that this is one of the best guiding principles to make you a good trainer, is to remember to always be specific. Because I see so many trainers, like they go to the gym and, they show up and they're like, all right, client, you're going to do, and they kind of like build it. They've already built like a station, and they're like, they take every one of their clients through the same thing. Not every client is going to, need the same stuff, right? Like everybody has individual, like different needs, right? Like my dad is kind of a weird example, but my dad's a truck driver. He's a furniture mover. So he's a long haul, across the country mover, right? So we grew up like doing that for years, right? I was actually raised on the road till I was 5. So that's what he does. And I remember like asking my dad, I was like, Dad, like what's better in the trucking industry? Like, do you like moving furniture? I mean, like it's hard on the body, like, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, freight drivers have it way easier, but you make more money doing this version. And like, I was like, why don't you ever haul like freight? And he's like, I can't, because his trailer doesn't have the right clips in it. It has the clips that are really good for holding furniture in place, but it doesn't have the clips that would like hold like a freight thing down there to like be able to unload it. Our flatbed truck is what carries cars. You know what I mean? Like those trailers are different because they do different things. And I was thinking, I'm like stuff like that is what we want to think of when we think about like training, right? How are you training your client? Are you training them to give them the tools to be good at something that isn't related to what they want? Are you training them for muscle growth when what they want to train for is cardio? Or are you training them for increased explosive strength when what they want is, stability, right? And there's some carryover for sure, but like, why would you make a sprinter run 3 miles? That doesn't make any sense. 3 miles is really a long distance, right? You're training a 5K, you're training for a 5K when their event is maybe only 100, meter dash, right? Which is, that's 100 meters is, what is it? That's 50 times less, or no, 500 times less? No, I can't be right. Is that right? It's a kilometer. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, 100. Oh, no, it's because it's 100 meters. 50 meters. It's 50 times less. That's way, way less. So this is why I don't teach math, by the way, guys. So the principle of specificity states that a training principle states that the body will adapt specifically to the stress that you place upon it. We sometimes call this the SAID principle because it stands for you will get specific adaptation to whatever imposed demands that you place on the body. So when you give your body, these different like types of stresses, your body will experience adaptation. Now, NASM's going to break this down into 3 major categories, which each involve like 2 major principles. So for instance, hold on one second, I want to make sure that it's actually not in the notes. So this is actually not going to be super relevant to, I don't think you're going to see this in your homework. But just to recap for people who saw this last time, the 3 major things that we consider when we're trying to be specific, we need to consider the mechanical specificity, the neuromuscular specificity, and the metabolic specificity, right? What we mean by that, oh, there they are. I guess it is in the notes, just slightly. What we mean by that, when I say mechanical specificity, is like if I'm training Eric for one thing and Al for another, mechanically, I need to consider the weight and the movements that I'm choosing for each of them, right? Al wants to work on his legs. Eric wants to work on his upper body, right? So the movements I'm choosing are leg-based stuff for Al and upper body-based stuff for Eric. And obviously, I would encourage them to do overall total body, but like in our example today, we're just going to be simple about it. So that's a big, and then let's say that like Eric wants to go for like endurance in his upper body and Al wants to go for strength. Well, and if that's the case, then I need to pick heavy weights for Al and light weights for Eric, right? Then we also got our neuromuscular specificity. Neuromuscular specificity is the exercise selection and the tempo. When I say exercise selection, what I mean is, are you choosing a stable version of an exercise, or are you choosing like an unstable version, right? Or are you choosing something that's explosive versus something that is not, right? So like when we were talking about those explosive push-ups, right? Those are really good for building like chest power, right? Explosiveness. So the tempo is really fast. And we're choosing like stable exercises. I wouldn't want somebody to do something really, I wouldn't want to do like clap push-ups with your hand on a medicine ball. Not only is that probably unsafe, but also like you're kind of taking away, you're going to lose explosiveness because you're going to spend time learning how to stabilize, and you're going to lose stability because of how fast you're moving. You're not giving your brain enough time to like learn how to do the movement. Right. So the advantage of a stability ball push-up, right, is that this kind of rolls down the whole time we're doing it, right? And now I'm learning how to stabilize in my shoulder here, right? The advantage of an explosive push-up is it's very stable and I can focus on maximal intensity, right? Maximal explosiveness. So if I do a little bit of both, I'm getting the worst of both worlds. You know what I mean? I'm taking away, I'm not playing to the strengths of either. And it's, I get general results. And we don't like general results. We like specific results. So neuromuscular specificity is the exercise selection, whether you choose a bench press versus a dumbbell chest press. Bench press is going to be more stable because of the bar, versus dumbbells, which is a little bit more unstable, or a stability ball under your back. And then it's a really unstable chest exercise. So that's exercise selection. And then tempo is how fast you're moving. So again, we go back to Al and Eric, right? Al told me he wanted to get like stronger in his legs, right? So I'm going to pick stable versions of exercise so he can not focus on anything except for strength. Whereas Eric told me he wanted endurance. So you know what? I'm going to make him do like a wobbly version, and that'll make all of his reps take longer, So in his upper body, we're going to do medicine ball push-ups, right? And now it's going to be like this, and he's going to be like, it only takes him, let's say like I had him doing 30 push-ups, right? That would probably only take, let's say 2 seconds per push-up, 60 seconds, right? But if I put his hand on a medicine ball, it's going to take 3 or 4 seconds per rep, right? Because it's like, every time you lose your balance and you're still working, right? So now we get endurance because we just increased the duration. And that's actually where we're going to get into metabolic specificity a little bit. Metabolic specificity is the repetitions and the rest period. You want to go for strength, you need to have low repetitions because the weight is heavy. That's the strength thing. This will affect this, right? The weight is going to affect how many reps you can do. But it's also the number of sets that you're doing. If you do a low number of reps, you need to do a high number of sets. It doesn't make any sense to go to the gym and do like, go and get under that bar and be like, all right, 1, and then rack it and then go home. You know what I mean? Like, you warm up, you do all this stuff, and then you just go in and do one singular rep. Yeah, that wouldn't work, right? Question?
I've seen that a bunch of times.
Yeah, I will say I'm actually not against 1 rep workouts. Usually there's a very famous like 10 by 1 routine, which is like 10 sets of 1 repetition and they take a ton of rest. That's really good for like pure power lifters or Olympic weightlifters who are like full, just going for like maximal explosiveness, and they're leaving it all on the floor in 1 rep every round. But it never works in regular gyms. It's just regular gyms are too crowded and too busy, and it's just not safe or effective to do it in places like that. So we don't usually see that stuff. But I mean, if you're training like an Olympic athlete, sure, yeah, maybe you will see a workout like that, right? But we see that. We see people just not do enough training volume, So we need repetitions, we need more sets. And then rest period also affects how much energy you're going to have available every set. Al wanted to go for strength. I need him to have all of his energy recovered every single set, because I'm trying to make him work as hard as possible every time because he's going for strength. Whereas Eric is going for endurance. I'm going to limit his rest. He's going to get as little rest as possible. And that's going to make it burn a little bit more because like we're just getting right into our next round. So we would see a big difference there, and that's where you'll see, like, if I look at like training for strength versus training for endurance, you'll see these charts. They show up on Instagram all the time. And you see like they'll break it down into like big 3 big categories, right? If you're training for endurance, 3 sets of maybe 15 to 20 reps. If you're training for growth, like hypertrophy, anywhere from 3 to 4 sets of 8 to 12 reps. And if you're training for strength, you want to do like 5 sets of 1 to 5. I disagree with these numbers. I think these numbers are wrong. NASM disagrees with these numbers, but yeah, those are some numbers that you'll see sometimes. Yeah, question. What's up, Eric?
What if a client wanted to train like an explosive power, but they were in like phase 1 level?
Oh, I missed it. Sorry. They're in what level?
Like phase 1.
Oh, phase 1. So you can still that's actually kind of a good question, right? What if you have a client who like comes to you and they're like, I want to work on explosive power. It's your first time training them. And just to fill Al and Carlos, when we say phase 1, we're actually talking about some NASM stuff here that I'm going to teach you later this mod, but like basically NASM is going to encourage you to take people through this staircase right here. Always starting at the foundation of stabilization and then working your way up. Power is at the very top, so it's very far away. So if I had a client who really wanted to like work on power, I would, and it's my first month training them, I don't train anybody in power unless it's like safe for them. So I can, if they have proper stability because they've been training for years, maybe we can go straight into some of that power stuff. You know what I mean? But like, if they're brand new to me, I'm not going to risk injuring them. I'll be like, all right, well, we're focused on power, but we're going to get there once you can properly move the joint, because they'll naturally get a little bit more power just by moving effectively. And we get effective movement from phase 1. You know what I mean? Like, this is the best way to learn how to do stuff properly because it's high repetition and it's very unstable. It's medium rest periods. And it's a very slow tempo. So you learn how to like move in properly, right? Like, how often do you guys see somebody in the gym doing chest presses and you'll just notice their angles are a little off, right? They get kind of, they'll end up like clumped up here while they're doing it sometimes, or some people will press really low. Sometimes like, and you'll just see like some funky angles, or like you see it all the time in incline chest presses. You see like, the incline chest press, you should be moving, the dumbbell should travel straight up 90 degrees. What you'll often see is like somebody will be at an angle And rather than going straight up like this, which is what it should be, they'll kind of go like this. They'll kind of match the angle of the bench because they're used to they're used to chest pressing flat. So when you put them on an incline, they don't really know how to do. And then all of a sudden, that's causing torque on the rotator cuff. So if they were doing something like that to increase their power, they're losing power because they're doing it wrong. So I would encourage them, if they're really being like, they're like, no, I just want to work on power. Stop making me do all this unstable stuff. I would encourage them to stick to the unstable stuff because it will teach them how to do it properly, and they will naturally get more power out of just moving the way they're supposed to. Then, yeah, once they show proper stability, in maybe a little while, I'm going to move into maybe some max strength and power training. I don't have to go all the way up the, I can skip phases of the OPT model. But that would be my advice, Eric. If you had somebody who's like really specific, like I want to get more explosive, I don't really want to work on stability, I would explain to them the benefits. And I would say, well, you probably should work on stability. That's my professional advice. And then, we are still doing some reactive stuff. You know what I mean? Like there is still some plyometrics. There's still explosive stuff you can do. It's just, it looks very different, right? We want to have explosive stuff that's focused on the eccentric explosiveness rather than concentric explosiveness. Like think about like a box jump down to stabilization, right? That's a plyometric exercise, but it's a stabilization version, right? So I'm on a box, I jump down, hold my landing, and I learn how to like keep my knees from caving in whenever I land. And if I can learn how to do that and learn how to land more, or I learn how to land just with soft landings, then I'm going to ensure that like I've got proper form, and that's going to make me, again, more explosive and more athletic overall because I'm doing things the way I'm supposed to. Did that answer your question the right way?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I was a little nervous. I kind of missed the mark on that one. But yeah, that's what I would do. I know that like sometimes I'll get questions like that where I'm like, what if they, these two things are completely diametric. Your client wants to do this, but we know we want to train them this way. The answer a lot of times is to try to convince them to do it your way. You're the expert, you know what I mean? Which is not as satisfying an answer because we want the answer to be like, yeah, you can have your cake and you can eat it too, but you can't. So that is the principle of specificity. So we do want to be as specific as possible. So I disagree with these numbers here, but you can see this is the internet trying to be specific. They're trying to like highlight the difference between this and this. This is a bad example though, because Arnold was really strong. But you'll see like, different things. If you're going for strength, there's that. If you're going for hypertrophy, and there's slightly different numbers. There we go. These numbers I agree with. 6 to 12, 1 to 2 minutes rest. Yeah, I like that better. Anyway, you're going to see different people have different opinions out there. Everybody studied this stuff. NASM's got its numbers, and other certifications out there have their numbers. They're all pretty darn similar because, they're all based in experience, and, you're only going to experience growth if you do it the right way. But we want to memorize our NASM numbers. So I'm not spending any time on those charts. All right. So next thing, these principles here, I think are a little, they're important, but they kind of happen naturally. If you're being specific and you're focusing on overload, you do those two things, you'll kind of naturally do all this other stuff. But one of them is the principle of individual differences, which basically states that like, if you're training for an individual sport or activity, your training should be based on that sport or that activity, right? Or if you're training an individual like athlete, you need to consider their age, their gender, their level of health, their progress, like where they are in their stages of training. I've said this before, but if I was training LeBron James, who is a world-class athlete, even if he is starting to get a little older, right? I would start him in stabilization. because like I haven't worked with him yet, now it doesn't mean that like, his workouts are going to be easy. That's one thing that I think people misunderstand about the OPT model, because it is a staircase, right? You would think that like it's, people think that this means easy to hard. That is not what this means. This means the whole thing is just as hard, but this is low intensity and this is high intensity, right? Like the other day when we were doing the Tabata squats, it was freaking hard, but I wasn't really worried about anybody getting injured because the intensity was really, really low. It's a bodyweight squat, or maybe 5 or 10 pounds. So while you can do a ton of reps, it's not intense. And honestly, that's because you could do a lot of reps. So we do need to kind of consider that. But I think, taking the time to like really like spend some mental effort on this, I think this kind of happens naturally. Again, if you consider like your principle of overload, and you're overloading your client the way you want to, and you consider the principle of specificity, you're going to kind of naturally consider your individual client. There's also the principle of reversibility. This is basically the if you do not use it, you will lose it principle. Not to quote the 40-year-old virgin or anything, but like untrue in the movie, true in the world of weightlifting. Adaptations are reversible if you stop training. You stop doing your cardio, you're going to get worse at cardio, right? In fact, that one goes away quick. You take a week off and your cardio will get worse, believe it or not. Now, I will say this, it also comes back very quick because you didn't lose any of the equipment. All you lost was your enzymes. Enzymes don't live very long in the body. So you kind of need to remake them just like consistently. So if you miss some training, that enzyme activity kind of dies. And that's why like a week off can really ruin you. At least it feels like you're ruined, and that comes back very quick. But so understanding that like what you've gained can be lost, right? If you train for flexibility and then you don't stretch anymore, you're gonna tighten back up. If you train for strength, you don't train anymore, you're gonna lose strength, right? Aerobic and adaptations kind of require constant attention. That's why you can't really be good at everything, because if you're taking time to get good at something, it means you're probably missing something else, and that's okay. That's why like athletes are specific, so aside from like, and that's true of everything other than like, some specific like skills and stuff. There is some like knowing how to do stuff properly that sticks around for quite a while. Even if it's been a long time since you've barbell squatted, if you've practiced the barbell squat before and you know how to do it properly, your brain will know how to do the movement. But I've definitely experienced this, and I'm going to experience this soon. I've been on a big like endurance, like high calorie burn routine for the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to be on it for another couple more. But I'm going to get back into heavy lifting in August, and man, that first week is going to be rough, because it's been a while since I've like lifted heavy, and I'm sure that my legs are going to want to give out on me, because that happens every year in August. Like when I come back to it, it's always like I get through like set number 1, and then while I'm resting, I'm like, okay, I feel fully recovered and rested, but my legs are almost refusing to move into set number 2. And that happens sometimes, because you have all the equipment there, but you haven't used it in a while, and it just, it sort of reverses itself, and your energy production basically just kind of craps out. You get stuck full of lactic acid. So that's the principle of reversibility. If you don't use it, you lose it. And then there's the principle of progression, which is progressive overload, right? Again, gradual increases in the workload are needed in order to experience adaptation. That's progression is slightly different than we talked about overload earlier, but like when I say overload, I guess that's technically referring to the first time, and then continued overload is what we would call progression. But again, lump those concepts together. They're the same thing. So progressive overload, continued adaptation requires continued overload. There's an optimal amount of overload that can be achieved in an optimal amount of time. That is one thing to remember, though. You cannot just push yourself as hard as possible every workout, every single day. You know, eventually something's going to give, something's going to break down, you know? So our training program doesn't look like climbing up the stair to max strength and then just staying there for a year. You know, we got to cycle back down every now and then, because if you're continually pushing yourself to experience overload, you're asking for an injury. You know, you're not recovering properly. This is why power lifters will do like a deload week. So a lot of power lifters will do different versions of deloading. There's a lot of, find like a numbers based version. That'll work. Here we go. There's a lot of different like takes on deloading and how it should be done, but let's say for the last, couple weeks on the squat, we were doing 315 for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets, right? So 5 sets of 5, right? So on the final week, you're really going to try to overload. You're going to try to get like a new 1 rep max, not a 1 rep max, in this case, the 5 rep max, but we're going to load that squat instead of with 315 pounds, we're going to load it with 320. And so the overall load has gone from 7,875 pounds up to 8,000. So now next week, we're going to take it easy. We're going to like take it and just rest a little bit and do 3 sets of 5 at 225 pounds. That's a major deload. We dropped the overall training volume down to 3,375. That is just below half the volume. I would say like half is, they're probably aiming for half, but they just can't get the numbers right here. I mean, I guess they just need what, 25 pounds? 5, 10, 15 pounds. Yeah, I mean, they would have gotten closer if they just added, if that was what was it, 230 times. Oh, yeah, that's too much load. Yeah, so they just couldn't map it out. That's the only reason they stayed at this, right? So they went down, they took the training volume down by half, basically, for 1 week. And what's going to happen is their body's going to go, oh, we didn't get beat up this week. So now it's going to be like, all right, I'm going to adapt to all that new stress that I just experienced because I was not good at that and I need to adapt. So if you overload really hard, right, then you can sort of, and you deload. In that deload week, you didn't tear the body down, you just kind of kept it physically active, right? And then you kept all your equipment just working at a baseline. That gives it time to over repair, right? So it kind of looks like this, right? If you look at, you'll see everybody kind of draws these kind of interesting looking charts here, right? So your base level was here, and then like, because you trained, your body got like beat the heck up, right? So you actually will experience a slight decline in your fitness level because like, obviously when you're really sore and you go to the gym, you're stiff to move, right? But then as you're slowly like recovering, you'll experience, we call this super compensation. And super compensation basically brings you up over the line and you hit like a new level. And ideally, this will actually look something more, let's put our line here. It'll actually look something a little bit more like this, right? It goes down and then super compensates, and hopefully it goes down again, but you'll notice that it went down slightly less, and this time it'll super compensate a little higher. And eventually, we're just above the line, right? See how I'm, you know, that's where my old 1 rep max, you know, is below this line. I'm now above the line. So we're hoping to see this sort of chart here repeat over time and kind of go this way, you know, just kind of slowly like amp up a hill, right? That's funny. They never draw these charts the way I just did. They never draw them. They always draw them like they give you one example. And I'm like, no, oh wait, actually, no, there we go. There's somebody who did it. Yeah, so it looks like this, right? You go down below, but then you super compensate. You go down below, but you went down below, but you're above your old baseline, right? Let's say this was 100 pounds. Your old 1 rep max is 100, right? Well, now it's 105, 110, 120. 130. You know what I mean? Like it's going up. That's what one. See, there we go. Somebody finally did a much cleaner drawing than I did. So that's the principle of progression, right? You need to experience this progressive overload slowly over time. Now, again, it's important to make sure that you've got that recoverability and reversibility, right? You know, that's the thing. I'm sure I have lost 1 rep max strength over the last few weeks doing all this endurance training. My endurance has gone up, you know, I've been running circles on the ultimate field, but like, I'm definitely like losing 1 rep max intensity. So I've lost overall strength, but doesn't mean that I can't get it back very quickly as soon as I start training for it specifically again. And, you know, this has been a good time for me to take time off, focus on other stuff, so I can come back and work harder and experience adaptation faster in a bit. Question, you change your training program. Do you change your pre and post workout supplementation too? Yeah, you probably would. Calorie counting matters. And also, what is the best rotation from endurance to overload? 3 months each. Yeah, good question, Al. That is an advanced question with a long explanation. So I'm going to give you the short version. But let me show you what a year-long cycle would sort of look like. Let's look at NASM annual plan. This is something that's on NASM's website for you to be able to goof around with, but you'll see like this is kind of what a year looks like, right? So if I started somebody in stabilization in the month of January, you would want to change your adaptation about every 4 to 8 weeks. That's what people recommend. Any longer than that, and you start to get kind of used to stuff and your body stops adapting. So maybe it would look something like that. We spend 2 months in stabilization, and then let's take them into, let's say they're going for size, right? So we go into hypertrophy, we go into strength, hypertrophy, strength. Now, this is 4 months away from stabilization, so it's probably time to cycle back down and get this again. Maybe you only do 1 month this time, and then we go back and we do a year that looks something kind of like that, right? So this would be if I change things up on a 4-week basis. That is how I would do this. Now, in terms of supplementation, it depends on what you're focused on. If you're going for heavy strength training, yeah, maybe you go with like creatine or something like that. So you would get a lot out of creatine here. Maybe this you need a lot of energy. So if you want to take caffeine and pre-workout, I guess you can. I don't think you would need to, but you can. Yeah, that might get you more results in this section here. I don't focus on supplementation as part of when I'm looking at like a cycle, I don't focus too much on supplementation. I consider supplementation afterwards. I write the program first and then I'm like, and if you want to possibly boost your results, maybe you can do this. But like down here, stabilization, right? Creatine's not going to do anything for me, you know? So I probably would cycle off of it here and then cycle back on down here. That being said, it takes about 2 weeks to get reflooded with creatine. So I don't know, maybe just keep it the whole time. There's really nothing wrong with staying on creatine, although you're kind of wasting your money up here, which is a bummer. But you're not focused on July, you're focused on what's going to happen in August. But calories, this is big. What if this person was a bodybuilder, right? And this is what their training wants to look like, and they are trying to like go through like a cutting cycle versus like a bulking cycle. Well, here I'd be on a calorie reduced diet, and here I'm going to be on a calorie surplus diet, and then to make sure that like I'm not just like putting on too much body fat, I cycle back down and go into calorie reduced here, make sure that like still got an aerobic engine, I still got safe muscles and stuff, and then I can get back into that. I recommend you cycle back to stabilization about twice a year. That's how I like to do it. I think everybody should do stabilization about twice a year. Does that answer your question, Al?
Yes, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Love that. That was an advanced question. That's stuff that's going to come up down the line. It's pretty good. I love that. Now, sort of shifting gears here. So that's all my soapbox stuff. That's like when I say soapbox stuff, what I mean is like all that information is like really specifically focused on like this is like your way in the world. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we're trying to aim you down the right path, you know? Those principles are really good for that. Now, obviously, when it comes to designing an actual workout, you need to know how to like write this stuff specifically. And so let's shift gears a little bit and take a look at like, you know, how to warm up and how to cool down. So warming up and cooling down is going to be a big part of every workout that you write. You should always precede every workout you have with some type of warm up, because your body's not just instantly ready to jump into exercise. If you can get into a workout and exercise without warming up ever, you're probably not working very hard in your workouts. Right? That kind of signals to me that you are missing some intensity. You know what I mean? Because like if you're working hard, you know, if you go straight into working hard without warming up, you're going to get injured, right? So if that's just true, and you didn't warm up and you didn't get injured, you probably weren't working hard. You know what I mean? Like, so warm-ups and cool downs warm-up should always precede your workout. It prepares your body physiologically. And one thing that's huge that nobody ever talks about, it also prepares you psychologically. Like I mentioned this before, like I get really annoyed when I'm driving, which is why like now I don't have to drive to the gym much. Got my gym area in my own house, you know. I get so annoyed like on the way, and like I'll just like think about stuff, and I also get like hazy when I'm driving. I get like kind of zoned out, you know, when I'm driving. So I'm gonna if I drive 20 minutes to the gym, I'm gonna be a little like out of the zone when I get in there. You know, I'm gonna be thinking about other stuff. So if I take just 5, maybe 10 minutes to hop on the treadmill and just key in and clear my brain, and I'm very intentional about how I use that 5 minutes, not only is my body going to go, oh, we are doing something much more physically active than we've done for the rest of the day. So all of a sudden my blood pressure goes up a little bit in response to get ready for exercise. You know, it starts shutting down the blood to my digestive system and, you know, increasing the blood to my skeletal muscle. My metabolism, you know, starts producing like adrenaline and thyroid hormones and things that are going to amp me up. You know, all that stuff starts to happen in that 5 minutes. And now, like, not only am I physiologically prepared with all those hormones and blood vessel moves and stuff, I'm also psychologically prepared because I just got to get rid of all my crap. You know, like I just get all that out of like people. We do not talk enough about how good warming up is for you psychologically. You know, it really does kind of key you into your workout. Now, there are different types of warm-ups. There are general warm-ups, which is kind of what I was just describing, hopping on a treadmill for 5 minutes. That's a general warm-up, right? It generally makes your body a little warmer. It's a literal warm-up, you know? So if you go to the gym and you have a series of stretches that you do every single time, you're like, I'm gonna start with the calves, I'm gonna get in the hamstrings and the quads, or you just kind of work your way up the body, right? That's a general warm-up. Do a couple calisthenics, maybe some body weight exercises, right? That's a general warm-up. Hop on the treadmill, it's a general warm-up. Specific warm-ups are warm-up routines that are directly related to like whatever sport or activity you're doing. So maybe a couple like squat jumps before your explosive leg day, right? You're not doing max effort or anything like that. When we met up at the field the other day, right? We did a couple gentle strides, right? Where it's like, all right, I want you to run 25% max effort, right? And that was your run to get you warmed up for the fact that we were going to do a lot of running the other day. So specific warm-ups are warm-up sets are a good example, right? I'm going to lift heavy on my bench press today. I'm going to do a couple warm-up sets, right? Warm-up runs, calisthenic exercises. Calisthenics are actually listed in both of these. Like if you're just doing like high knees and butt kickers to get your blood pumping before you go do bench pressing, well, then those calisthenics are general, right? But if you do some push-ups before bench pressing, that's in your chest area. It's a pressing exercise. So it's somewhat similar. I would call that specific at that point. And there's really great warm-up protocols out there. In fact, if you guys want to download this, if you're serious about your heavy lifting, I really recommend this app called Warm Up Lifts. Warm-up lifts. Oh, actually, that's not good. I forgot. If I Google it, it's not going to come up on the App Store. Warm-up calculator. So you can see here, warmupreps.com. There we go. Let's say I'm doing like a max single. I'm going to test my 1 rep max today on a deadlift, right? And my 1 rep max used to be, we'll say, let's just to actually keep the math simple, we'll say it used to be 100. And we now want it to be 105. So what I would do if I were warming up for a workout is I would do 1 rep of 45 pounds with just the bar, rest maybe 30 to 60 seconds. You don't need to rest for maximal intensity during your warm-ups. Do another set of 1 rep with just the bar, 45 pounds. That's 45% is what we're seeing there, right? Actually, let's make this 200 just in case that math's wrong. Is that going to be say 90? Yeah, okay. So let's say my 1 rep max is actually, let's say 200, right? I would do 1 rep of 5 or 1 set of 5 repetitions with just the bar. And then I would do 1 set of 5 repetitions at 80 pounds, 1 set of 5 at 120. And then I don't want as my weight's going up, I don't want the intensity to take away from my workout. So I'm going to drop the reps down. 1 set of 3 reps at 140, 1 set of 1 rep at 160. And then it's like I do some heavy singles, 180, 200. And then eventually I'm going to try to hit 205, you know? So let's go to a slightly different version. Let's say you're doing a 5x5, right? So 5x5 is a classic. Like there's the starting, they call this like starting strength. They call it like the strong lifts routine. It's a very famous routine. But again, let's say you're trying to do 185 pounds on an overhead press, 2 sets at 45 pounds by itself, 1 set at 100 of 5, 1 set of 3 at 125, 1 set of 2 at 155, and then you get into your working sets for however many sets you're doing. Let's see, it's 5 sets of 5. Now that's this website. There's other warm-up calculators out there. Here's a much more simplified version. Let's say your starting weight is 185 pounds, or no. Oh, actually, this is letting you pick your starting weight. So let's say you always start with the bar no matter what you do, and you're going up to 225 pounds. Well, there you go. There's your protocol. Oh, and then it's actually showing you the plates. That's fun. That makes your math easy. You don't have to do plate math. But yeah, so you can see, right? There's different warm-up protocols out there. I actually don't have any specific for you. The one I like, honestly, is on the App Store, and it's listed it's called Warm-Up Lifts. I love Warm-Up Lifts. It's a handy little app. You just tell it how many reps you're doing today, and you tell it how many pounds you're trying to hit, and it just hits the math for you. And it's just using percentages, and it does all the math in the background and keeps it really simple. I've followed that for a few years now. I will say I will sometimes be a little lazy about my warm-ups, and I'll usually skip to the 3rd warm-up set. And so I'll usually only do like 3 or maybe, honestly, about 2 to 3, maybe 2 to 4. 2 to 4. I'll usually do 2 to 4 warm-up sets before a day. If I'm really stiff, I'll do like 5 or 6 warm-up sets before like getting under the bar, you know, for barbell squatting at least. Squatting is what I usually need to warm up the longest with. Benching, I'm not much of a bench presser. I'm not very good at bench press. Personally, I got long arms, man. Like it's just I'm not built for it. So because of that, I really kind of struggle on that lift. And I also never put any emphasis on it when I was younger, which is a bummer now that I'm older. But so because I can't really push myself as well because I'm not as naturally gifted at the bench press, I don't warm up as much for it. You know, I usually do, 2 or 3 warm-up sets for a bench press, and then I feel like I'm good to go because my intensity is not that high. So yeah, so that's how you kind of want to warm up. You do want to do your specific warm-up sets, guys. Warm-up sets are great. It's just grease on a hinge. You know what I mean? It really just gets you ready for your workout, which is so very important. God dang. So, yes. Now, cool down's also important here. Now, I will say cool down's a little bit less important physiologically. Your body's going to adapt without cooling down. You know what I mean? Like, you got what you needed. You get your workout in. So a lot of people skip their cool down. You know, I'm looking at myself. I'm looking at all three of you. I'm sure you guys have skipped a cool down in the last couple months at some point. Everybody skips their cool. You know, everybody's like, I gotta go. You know, like it just happens. It's the sad truth that we all kind of live in. Here's the thing, though. There are some serious benefits to cooling down. Some of it is you are stretching things out, so they're not going to stiffen up as much. Now, stretching has not been shown to make you less sore the next day. That's kind of a myth that you'll hear people say. They're like, oh, you got to stretch, you're going to be sore the next day. Stretching will not keep you from being sore. If you're going to be sore, stretching won't save you. That being said, it will sometimes help a little bit with joint inflammation, and that's very handy because stretching basically puts tension under a very long duration. So you get a lot of maximal blood flow in there, metabolically helping with the tissue's repair. It also provides an emotional balance after exercise. So you got to remember that exercise is stress. Your body thinks that it's fighting a saber-toothed tiger. You know what I mean? Like your body doesn't know what a gym is. It thinks that you're in combat. So when you exercise and you cool down, you are signaling to your brain, you know, this cave person part of your brain, you're signaling like, hey, we won, the stress is over, we're transitioning back to a normal lifestyle, you know, and your body de-stresses. And again, it gets into repair mode more quickly that way. The more stressed you are, the more it's in fight mode or flight mode, right? We want to get it back into rest and digest mode, right? Recovery mode. Now, if you do want to reduce your soreness, the trick, and people never believe me when I tell them this, especially my clients, but cardio will help with your soreness. Sounds crazy, but just a little bit of gentle cardio post-workout has been shown to reduce soreness in people massively. And the reason why, think about it, right? You create a bunch of lactic acid when you're working out. If you're letting that lactic acid sit there, it's going to continue burning your muscles, creating more damage. If you burn it up and you flush that, remember, how do we burn up lactic acid? We use it for fuel in our aerobic energy system. Look down here, right? We're about to get into this one more time. The more you can use it for fuel, the less it's sitting around, and therefore you are not going to be as sore the next day. Now, I'm not saying you should go do some sprints after your workout. I'm saying like go get like a little bit of a gentle little, you know, jog in or elliptical or rowing machine, something that just kind of gets your blood pumping. It evenly distributes lactic acid throughout your blood, and it burns up a bunch of that lactic acid as a fuel source. And that will give you way more energy. You get about 20 minutes, all of a sudden you're going to be hit with like a wave of energy, and you're going to feel really good and good to go after you leave the gym, which is also just great. So cool downs can sometimes be the best part of the workout, man. They really sometimes the biggest thing, but I get it. I skip my cool downs all the time. I don't give myself enough time to work out, and then I'm like, I gotta go. You know, it happens all the time. But we try to make sure it doesn't happen. So really quickly, talking about more adaptations and why these are important. We do got to look a little bit at energy transfer. Again, moving from glycolysis into our other energies. So I broke this down by ingredients and byproducts, right? Your ingredients here, right? I'll actually, you know what I'll do? Let's see if this works. It does. All right, so here's our sort of ingredients, right? Glycolysis, our ingredient is glucose, right? So if we think of like, you know, this is like glucose goes in, and pyruvate and ATP come out, right? So we get a little bit of energy by, you know, we put a little bit of glucose in, we got a little bit of energy out, right? Then that pyruvate becomes an ingredient down here, a little bit of oxygen comes in as well, right? And then again, our product is a little bit of ATP, and our byproduct is a little bit of CO2, but a whole bunch of the NAD and fat, right? These guys in particular are the important part here, right? Just like lactic acid was important over here, right? So now that NAD and fat, those ingredients go into the electron transport chain, and a whole bunch of ATP comes out. And then that comes, our byproduct of CO2 and water comes out as well. So that's sort of like what energy transfer is, right? You are literally transferring, as you go from one to the next. So if we look at like over here, if this is like duration, if you consider the duration that this is happening, right? And it just kind of works its way down like this, right? This is sort of like as, we're looking at like, we'll put, we'll say this is like, 0 seconds here at the very beginning. And then like, you're going to stay in glycolysis for, 30 to 60 seconds. So we'll say this is like the 60-second marker right here, right? And then you're suddenly transferring into that Krebs cycle, right? And this is, greater than 2 minutes in terms of duration. So as your duration like kind of continue, you're looking at where you're at in this, right? I can't draw like a gradient. I don't think I can, at least. The paint bucket tool doesn't have gradients on it, does it? Yeah, no way. But you think about it, right? Like if we would look at this in terms of intensity, you're kind of starting like this is kind of in reverse, right? You start with like high intensity, right? So like this section here is very intense. And then you kind of lose intensity as your duration starts to get longer, right? And so our intensity goes down a little bit, and it goes down a little bit more, until eventually you're fully in your aerobic system. And it's like, yeah, now our intensity is just really quite low, if that kind of makes sense. These kind of look like our cardio zones here, this would be like, very much zone 3, zone 2, zone 1, and then this is like a warm-up zone almost. So that's how your energy transfer works, right? So we've got 4 ways to produce ATP, right? We got creatine phosphate, where we can just attach that directly. We didn't even put that on here because like that, there's no energy. Actually, that's something to really mention really quickly. There is no energy transfer from ATP-PC into glycolysis. Like you're not using the byproducts of the ATP-PC system for glycolysis. We're not doing that. We just can produce energy using creatine as a means to sort of like produce energy in the very beginning. And if we can be done with that energy production, we don't need glycolysis to kind of kick up and take place. Which is why, like, when I talk about like diabetics, you'll hear people say like, hey, you should get into high intensity lifting as a diabetic. Why? Because, well, high intensity lifting burns through glycolysis. But there's a difference between high intensity and maximal intensity. I wouldn't take a diabetic and have them only do like 5 reps on like super heavy on the bar, because the duration's not long enough to burn through the glucose. We're only relying on creatine at that point, because it's only 5 to 10 seconds long, if we're assuming 2 seconds per rep. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, so we've got creatine phosphate. There is also a little bit of a kinase reaction. That's the creatine kinase right there. So those two are kind of happening. Then there's glycolysis. There's the anaerobic glycolysis, right? Where we take place, glucose goes into the fluid, spits out energy and pyruvate. And then there's aerobic oxidation, which is like, that's the complicated one. The pyruvate from the glycolysis goes into your mitochondria to be fully oxidized in the Krebs cycle. When that happens, you get a little bit of energy, but you get a whole bunch of NAD and FAD. And the NAD and FAD are what become energy in the electron transport chain. They have a whole bunch of protons, which means they have electrons with them. We squeeze them all together to get a whole bunch of ATP. So that is the Krebs cycle transferring to to the electron transport chain. So again, we're transferring, right? We go from here down to here, down to here, right? We start with one into the next, into the next. We're transferring it each single time, which means even if you are training like a runner, you get a little bit of glycolysis in their first 6, let's say you're training a marathoner, they get like 30 seconds to 60 seconds of glycolysis that's going to happen before, they get fully into their aerobic system. Now, if they're going for a 4-hour run, well, not, I guess it would, let's say a better marathon. Let's say they're going for a 2.5-hour run. 30 seconds is, let's see here, 2.5 hours. That's 60, 120, 180 minutes divided by 0.5. So I guess that's 1/360th, which would be 0.2% of the time of their sport they are training in glycolysis. But they did get some glycolysis, like it did technically happen. They're just obviously not getting very much of it, right? Because they've kind of transferred and then stayed aerobic the whole time. So when it comes to cardio training for like your anaerobic athletes or cardio training for aerobic athletes, they're going to look very different, right? Because like you are transferring into those later energy systems for some clients and other ones for others, right? Good Lord. So anaerobic exercise is mostly used for like athletes in your non-endurance sports. So when we talk about like what we generally think of when we think of sports, we think of like soccer players, football players, basketball players, baseball players, right? We're thinking of hockey players. We're thinking of like the sports are kind of like, field sports or court-based sports, ring-based sports, volleyball, stuff like that. Those athletes are mainly training anaerobically. They are mainly spending their time focused on like, relatively high intensity. They are mostly training in this system here, right? Glycolysis, where intensity is maximal to high, or high to maximal, like working really hard. Bodybuilders, same thing. Bodybuilders are also very much trained. There's not a lot of difference between bodybuilders' energy training and athlete energy training. They actually both want to get very good at creating plenty of lactic acid. So when it comes to like training for cardio, if we look at our cardio training adaptations, anaerobic adaptations are best used by best developed by training in interval training systems. So if we look at like interval training, if we look at interval training as a line chart, this is kind of what it sort of looks like, right? This is like sprint interval training here, right? So if you think about like this is intensity on a scale of, they're using an RPE scale here. So we're saying this is intensity of 0 to 10, right? So like sprint training is all about like you want maximal intensity. And then you want minimal intensity where you recover. Maximal intensity, minimal intensity, right? That interval training is probably the type of cardio that we're mostly going to focus on for maximal intensity athletes. Now, for field sport based athletes, we're probably going to use high intensity interval training, which is a little bit different than maximal intensity, right? So you get to like an 8 on the RPE scale, which means you don't have to fully recover back down to a, almost a 1 or a 0, right? You can recover like a 3. And then, that means that like your intensity is still relatively high. It's not maximal intensity, but pretty good recovery as well. So your interval might look something more like that versus steady state cardio. I'm hoping they would have that picture here somewhere. Steady state. I don't know if they made a third chart. I guess that kind of makes sense. They don't necessarily need it. Steady state would just be a straight line. So imagine like a line at the 4, and you would just stay, or line around the 4 or the 5, right? And just flat line into infinity. That's your steady state cardio. Steady state cardio, not important for most athletes. Not important for most bodybuilders, for sure. So interval training is probably going to comprise most of your metabolic cardio adaptations, right? So athletes will rely primarily on and then sorry. So that's our anaerobic athletes. Most of those are going to do interval training. Now, that can be running, it can be swimming, it can be resistance training. You can do like a circuit, you do 10 exercises with a kettlebell in a row, you're going to be breathing. That's your cardio, which makes a lot of sense. Like, we don't necessarily need to throw every client on the treadmill. I know I use the treadmill as my example a lot. That's because I'm biased towards running, but like any cardio works, guys. It's all the same, in terms of adaptations. Obviously, like, the mechanics are different. And so, like, it's not like being on an elliptical will make you a better runner, because your mechanics are, you're going to be, if you run with that form, you're going to look weird and inefficient. But in terms of like the cardio stuff and what's going on a cellular level, like, it's all the same. Rowing machine, just as good as a treadmill, just as good as swimming, just as good as Stairmaster. So whatever your favorite is, do it. What's important is how hard is your intensity, how hard you're pushing yourself. So those are probably the most common, but we want to focus on like these intensities and these durations, right? Now, obviously and like I said, the brain will learn the movements based on whatever you do. So obviously, like, if you're a football player and you are doing a little bit of intervals, you should probably be doing sprints, because that's related to the sport of football rather than swimming. That being said, if you want to go for a swim, it's not going to kill you, it just isn't directly, you're just not training specifically for your sport. Michael Phelps can get on a spin bike, but he should probably stay in the pool. Now, there are also aerobic athletes. What about like actual, like, what if you guys are training like a marathon, like somebody wants to train for the marathon, right? I've trained so many people for the LA Marathon over the years, right? LA Marathon's a big event here in LA, and your clients are going to come to you and ask you how to improve their endurance, right? You're going to need to put them on a running routine. So they're going to primarily rely on their oxidative metabolism. So their adaptations are cardiovascular ones, right? So we are looking at mostly keeping the intensity really low so that we can keep the duration really high. You'll see marathoners with their coaches. Their coaches will be on the sideline, at certain like checkpoints, and they're like, slow down. What a weird thing to say to somebody who's in a race. Wouldn't you want them to speed up? It's a race, right? Well, no, because they got all this duration to get through. If their pace is too fast, it means they're pushing themselves too hard. They might run out of steam before the end of the race, and then they're not going to finish, or they're going to slow down, and they would have finished at a better time later. I'm from Oregon, and the biggest thing, Steve Prefontaine, you've probably heard of him. He's a very famous runner from Oregon. And he was great. I mean, he was a really like, he was kind of like, he's kind of the bad boy of running, which made him like really fun to watch. Everybody really liked him, but he had terrible strategy. He wanted to win the race the whole time. So he would just run really hard in the beginning and stay running as hard as he could. And he won a lot. I mean, he was still very good, but it's so funny. Like, you'll listen to like people talking about like coaching him, and they're like, yeah, we couldn't get him to pace himself because he would just, take out the game. Not a very good strategy for a runner. Your adaptations, you want to focus on like recovering while you're still on the go, So aerobic adaptations are going to be very pulmonary. We're going to see your lungs will get more blood vessels in them to, those alveoli. You'll get more enzymes to make that reaction easier to pick up oxygen at your lungs. You'll mostly focus, you'll learn how to utilize fat and carbohydrates really well in your metabolism. And you'll probably develop mostly type 1 muscle fibers, which will have more mitochondria, more enzymes, more hemoglobin, more myoglobin, all that stuff. But those muscles are going to be small. They don't need to be big. They don't need to produce like a lot of like strength. Anaerobic muscular adaptations. Let's look at our muscular stuff, right? What about an athlete who does want to train for strength or does want to train for size? Well, that's where we look at our different muscle fibers types, right? So we already talked about this. This is what we highlighted when we met up at Sochi. We looked at the differences in muscle fiber types, right? Plyometrics, for instance, are super explosive and their duration's really short. So they're very good for type 2X muscle fibers. Whereas like bodybuilding, which is like pretty heavy, but also like a goodly amount of reps, that's very good for like creating maximal lactic acid production. So you're going to get a lot of burn, right? And a lot of the factors that affect your anaerobic training are your ability to push through that discomfort and through that fatigue. So athletes training for muscular adaptations are developing type 2A or type 2X fibers. Type 2X from really heavy explosive lifts, type 2A from relatively heavy but somewhat endurance-based lifts, right? And then what about like a bodybuilder who wants to train, what about aerobic training? What about like runners that want to focus on like aerobic adaptations? What about type 1 muscle fibers, right? We already kind of talked about it, but athletes training for aerobic fibers they're going to benefit from long duration activity, right? So this is where we're going to see for the first time what are called our fit principles. Al and Silas, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because it comes up better later this module. But your fit principles are basically some rules that you want to follow or rules that you want to think of when you're like telling somebody what to do cardio wise. It stands for frequency, intensity, time, type, and enjoyment. That's the E at the end is optional, but NASM is like, no, put the E in there. So frequency, intensity, time, type, and enjoyment, right? So frequency is like how often you are doing it. We cannot have high frequency and high intensity. If you do, you're asking for an injury. You shouldn't do interval training every day. It's too intense. You're likely to get hurt. So frequency, intensity is the level of demand of the exercise. Time is the length of time you are spending doing whatever activity it happens to be. So time is like the duration, right? Type is, are you running? Are you swimming? Are you biking? Are you stairmastering? Are you elliptical, rowing machine? Whatever, right? You're doing kettlebell training, battle ropes, whatever. That's your type, whatever type of cardio you choose. And enjoyment. Enjoyment is like how much pleasure your client is getting out of the activity. I think battle ropes and kettlebell training are really fun. They're really fun, engaging ways to exercise. So because of that, they burn a lot of calories because people are willing to do them more often. So maybe your intensity doesn't have to be super high, but your frequency can, your intensity is pretty low, but your frequency can be really high because people like doing it. That's a good way to keep your client coming back. So there is something that we consider called a work to rest ratio. The higher the intensity, the greater the amount of rest you are going to need to ensure that you can get. This is why like max strength adaptations will take 3 to 5 minutes of rest in between workouts. So if you are going for endurance, you're probably going to go with a 1-to-1 or 1 to 1.5 ratio. You know what I mean? Like endurance, like if I do 30 seconds of running, I'll take 30 seconds of rest, or 60 seconds of running, 60 seconds of rest, right? That's really good for training your aerobic system, right? You want to get better at like your aerobic and type 1 muscle fibers, go do a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, you want to get better at glycolysis, do a 1-to-2 ratio. This is where most athletes will train, right? Most sports, right? They'll do like 60-second sprint, recover for 2 minutes. 60-second sprint, recover for 2 minutes, right? So 1-to-2 ratio. And if you're a full-on sprinter, this says 1-to-3, but honestly, that number can be way, way higher. I know Olympic athletes who train at like a 1:8 or a 1:10 work to rest ratio, right? You sprint for 10 seconds, you take 2 minutes of rest. That's a 1:12 ratio, right? That's a lot of rest before you do your next one. Think about Usain Bolt. His whole event is 10 seconds long. That is extremely high intensity. So he's going to take a lot of rest between every round. So those are your PIP principles, and we definitely go over these a little bit better later on. But they are a good way to sort of like consider, writing a cardio routine or for somebody. So genetics are going to play a big role here. For the record, you are going to be predisposed. If you are a naturally big person, chances are like you are sort of like you could probably come from a long genetic line of type 2 athletes. You probably have large muscle mass. Me, I'm very much got like a runner's build. I'm sure if you were to like do my DNA ancestry, right, it would be like, oh, that guy comes from a runner's tribe. Another tribe shows up, hey, we're out of here, run away. So it's probably where my ancestry lies, right? I'm a little bit better at the aerobic stuff. Somebody else might be, look at Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was a kid. He was a naturally big dude, right? And then he found his way to bodybuilding. He found a way to get his genetics to match his passions, and it worked out really well. Look at like Lance Armstrong. He was a big fat cheater, but he actually had his heart and his blood vessels are about 20% larger than the average person's. He was genetically designed to be a cardio athlete. That was perfect for him. He's a specific like genetic abnormality, but like that's a good example. So you will probably be predisposed towards one thing or another. Doesn't mean you can't train for it. Doesn't mean that you can't train for something that you're not predisposed to, but we should be aware of that. There is definitely going to be a genetic component to all of this, right? Aging is going to be a big part of it as well. Aging is going to change how your body adapts. When we're younger, we're really good at glycolysis. We're really good at type 2 muscle fiber building. As we get older, we start to focus more on type 1 muscle fibers. Our body gets a little bit better at endurance and a little bit less intense. This is why you'll hear like, seniors talk about like being, they'll sometimes feel like they're in the best stage of their life when it comes to like a sport like golf. Golf is a really low intensity, long duration sport, 18 holes over a couple hours, right? And they get better as they get older, weirdly. You'd think that they would get lower because you'd lose all that power on the swing, but it's not about the swing. It's about, being able to swing properly, consistently. Because yeah, maybe you can put a lot of power behind that swing, but you're also erratic, whereas like somebody who's a little older, they're gonna be pretty good at it because like they're less erratic and they're focused more on aim, which is pretty important in a sport like golf. So older adults definitely have the ability to gain muscle. They definitely have the ability to gain strength, but it is somewhat limited by the genetic component. They tend to be a little bit better at developing enzymes and aerobic metabolism rather than anaerobic metabolism. There's also looking at like prescribing your intensity. A lot of different ways you can do it, guys. You can do the treadmill and you can base it on their VO2 max if they're breathing into like a machine. You can analyze their VO2 max and be like, hey, you're consuming 80% of your oxygen. That means you're in a jog. Let's get you to consuming 95% of your oxygen, and that'll put them into a sprint. It's great, but very difficult, requires some pretty fancy equipment. So usually we don't use VO2 max as a prescriptor. Usually what we'll use is a percentage of your heart rate. So what I would do is I would say, hey, I want you, if we look at NASM's heart rate zones, they never have like a good version of it. There we go. So NASM is going to break things down into 3 zones. Zone 1, Zone 2, and Zone 3. And these are percentages of your maximal heart rate. So, 65 to 75%, that's your Zone 1. 76 to 85%, that's your zone 2. 86 to 95%, that's your zone 3. I could also just base it on my clients' like perceived intensity, right? I could say, hey, I want you at a 7 out of 10, an 8 out of 10, a 9 out of 10. I want you at a 10 out of 10, right? That's your intensity. You should be recovering around like a 6, you know, that's your jog, right? But your sprint should be a 10. So let's put it together, right? Let's say I go back to that intensity and I look at my work to rest ratios, right? If my intensity goes up to a 10, I'm probably going to need a 1 to 3 or maybe even a 1 to 5 rest ratio. So I put you at a 10 for 10 seconds and I let you recover for 60 seconds. That's a 1 to 6 ratio actually. Cool. That's great. Sprint for 10 seconds, recover for 60, right? Really good for maximal intensity work, really good for athletes. Or maybe I make you run pretty hard, but I give you, but not like, it's not like a sprint. So I say like, hey, I want you to get like an 8 out of 10, and I want you to recover at like a 6 out of 10. So I figure out what my 8 out of 10 pace is, I figure out what my client's 6 out of 10 pace is, and I make them switch between those two numbers. 1 minute at the 8 out of 10, 2 minutes at the 6 out of 10. That's a 1 to 2 ratio. 1 minute on, 2 minutes off. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then if I had cardio, if I wanted like aerobic adaptations, I'm like, I want you to be somewhere between a 6 or a 7 out of 10 for 30 minutes. If you want to like speed up and slow down a little bit, you can have a little bit of variety in there. But for the most part, I just want you to be never below a 6. And I don't really want you to go below above a 7 because I need your duration. If you get above a 7, you'll probably drop your recovery down below a 6, and we don't want to do that. So I need you to recover like on the go. And that is sort of how the work to rest ratios are sort of operating. We'll look more at that on the strength side of things tomorrow. But really, that's about it today, guys. Those are all. Today is more of like it's a lot of principles, right? It's a lot of like guiding concepts, you know. Tomorrow we'll start looking at some specific numbers and how to choose, you know, how to tie some number-based data to all of this. But other than that, do you guys have any questions today? How are you feeling?
Good, good.
Love it. Eric, Silos, how you guys doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
Love that. Well, heck, fellas, let me go ahead and kill the recording here.